would you take that? If that was you, I'd be like, I would think that this should be obvious. Of course I want to be healed. I'm in the place where healing happens. I'm in the place where healing is supposed to come. Yes, I want to be healed. But Jesus asked him this question. And the man's response was actually a little funny, though, because the man says in verse 7, it says, the sick man answered him, Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, but while I am coming, another steps down before me. So he said, Jesus asked him if he wants to be healed, and he doesn't tell him yes. He doesn't say, yes, Lord, I want to be healed. He immediately points out the fact that I don't have anyone to put me in. I don't have anyone to help me. I don't have anyone to carry me down to where I can get healed. So Jesus' question is actually kind of interesting, the fact that he didn't just automatically say yes. But Jesus told him, in response to his, what he told Jesus, hey, there's nobody here. There's nobody here that'll help me. There's nobody here that gets me into the water before anybody else, because somebody else is always in there first. And Jesus looks at him and he tells him, he says, rise, take up your bed and walk. Again, I'm obviously stuck. How would you take this conversation? Would you say, yes, Jesus, okay, I've been here, I can't get into the water, I just can't get into the water, no one will put me in the water, and your response to me is, take up your bed and walk. This is the encounter that this man is having with Jesus. But if you notice, it shows that the man actually had faith, because it says, and immediately the man was made well, took up his bed, and he walked. See, he realized what Jesus was actually telling him here. Jesus was well, they knew who Jesus was. They had heard about him. They had heard about his teaching. They had heard about his miracles. And now he's standing before him and he tells him, do you want to be made well? And he's like, well, I don't have a man before him. But Jesus is sitting there and Jesus is standing in front of him like, I'm here to heal you. I am here to help you. Take up your bed and walk. And the man did it and he listened. He listened to what Jesus said, he took up his bed, and he walked. Now, what would have happened if that man had had my attitude, and he was sitting there, and he was like, I just told you I can't get up. He just sat there till he died. It required him to take a little bit of action. Jesus told him to get up, so he had to make the effort to get up. And this is where the man found himself able to get up and walk. And I imagine there was something about that experience, because it says, and that was the day, it was the Sabbath. The Jews therefore said to him who was cured, it is the Sabbath, it is not lawful for you, crying out and saying, Son of David, have mercy on us. And when he had come into the house, the blind men came to him, and Jesus said to them, do you believe that I am able to do this? Now they're at you, they're asking you for healing, they're asking you to have mercy on them, they're asking you to touch them. But then Jesus asked them another question. Do you believe that I am able to do this? And Jesus responded. They responded to him and they said to him, yes, Lord. And he touched their eyes, saying, according to your faith, let it be to you. And their eyes were open. See, Jesus is explaining to them, I'm able. He's never denying the fact that he's able to touch them. He's able to have mercy on them. Jesus is able to do all things. Jesus is able to heal anyone. He's able to touch anyone. He's able to do anything. But there is a part that we must play. Just as the man by the well, if he'd have sat there, he would have stayed there. If he had let his condition define who he was when Jesus told him to get up and walk, he would have still been sitting there. Now these blind men have a similar opportunity, because Jesus asked them, do you believe that I am able to do what you're asking me to do? And when they answered to him, yes, it says, then he touched their eyes, saying to them, according to your faith, let it be unto you. See, he's reminding them that what you believe has an impact. What you know, what you believe will happen can play a role in it. That's the thing. If you sit here and tell God, I believe in you, but you're not going to do this, what's happening? How many of us have ever said a prayer in disbelief, an unbelief? Nobody else? Nobody else? You prayed a prayer. You prayed for someone full well thinking, I know you're not going to do it, God. I know you're not going to touch my relative. I know you're not going to help them out of this situation. How many times have we called on God in unbelief saying, I may ask you to do something knowing that you're not going to do it? But that's what Jesus tells them. And according to your faith, let it be to you. So if your faith is that God's not going to do it, guess what? He's not going to do it. If you believe that He's going to do it, He will do it. But He said, according to your faith, let it be unto you. That's what we would think. If we were looking at these encounters, like I said, you would look at the outside circumstances and you would think, man, that Jesus was kind of hard on these guys. This one guy's a cripple. Says he's been there for 38 years. He's been down on his luck. He's had a hard life. And Jesus asked him if he wants to be whole. He shouldn't have to ask that question. It should be obvious that the man wants to be healed. But you know, there's a lot of people that take a lot of pride in their illnesses. There's a lot of people that love the fact that they have problems. We call it drama seekers now. There's people that love to be wrapped up in things, and they say they want something, they say they want things done, but the truth of the matter is they really don't. They really don't want to be healed. They really don't want to be changed. How many times do you hear people talk about how I would like to go to church, I would like to be part of something, I would like to have Jesus in my life, but I got to do this first. I got to do something else first. What if the man at the pool said, Lord, I believe you're telling me the truth, but before I get up and take my bed and walk, I got to get in that pool. I got to be the first one in that pool before I can be healed. Guess what? He would have still been sitting there because his faith would not have been put into action. Our faith has to be put into action when we're talking about asking Jesus for something, asking Jesus for blessings, asking Him to touch us, asking Him to heal us. A lot of times it's all about me. It's all about what I want, all about all these things that I need. And Jesus is telling them that it's according to your faith, let it be unto you. Now we can take that another way, but I'm not going to try to chase that one down there because it can be too much. But Jesus cares about the circumstances. Jesus actually knew all about these men. He knew about the guy at the well. He knew he had been there a long time. He knew that he was a cripple. He knew that he couldn't get in the water on his own. He knew that he didn't have anyone to take him in there. Aren't you glad to know that sometimes we don't have to rely on other people? Sometimes we do. Sometimes we have to rely on ourselves in. But He wants you to be honest a lot of times about your circumstances. How many times are we not honest with ourselves? How many times do we lie to ourselves about how we got to where we are? How many times do we find ourselves in a place that we put ourselves? We trusted in the wrong people. We trusted in the wrong things. We took the wrong roads. Guys, that would be for us. You know, we don't take directions a lot of times. How many of us ever took a wrong road? Mark's laughing. He knows what I'm talking about. You got on a road and you just knew that it was where you were supposed to be going. And how long do you drive that road before you say, you know, I'm not in the right spot. This road doesn't go where I think it goes. And if you got your wife with you, she's like, why don't you just ask someone? Oh, yeah. Why don't you just ask someone for directions? I don't need no directions. I know where I'm going. I've been here before. Half hour later, why don't you ask for directions? I don't need directions. And then you start looking for a reason to stop. You know, there's a gas station up here. I think I'll go get a snack. And while you're in there, you'll be like, hey, by the way, where is such and such at? Don't say anything to her when you get back in the car. That was a funny story with me and Lori one time. One of the first times we ever went to Pigeon Forge, I'm a little jealous of Donna and Mark. They went there last week. they were at Pigeon Forge, living the life and all that good stuff. Well, me and Lori, one of the first times we went there, when we were coming back home, this is back when we had maps. For you younger kids, that's this thing on a paper that you have to look at. And you have to figure out where it's at. Yeah, that tells you all about it. That's cheating. Google Maps ain't right. They'll lie to you. Google Maps will send you somewhere you don't need to be. But we got the map, and this isn't going to strengthen my case, by the way, but we got the map, and we're looking at this thing, and I'm like, hey, Lori, if we go down this road here, it's real short, and we'll end up over here, and then we can make it back home quicker. Well, we got on that road, and what the map didn't show was that the road was back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, all the way down a mountain, back and forth. And then we ended up, what normally was a 5-hour ride ended up taking us almost 12 hours because we ended up going through 4 states and coming off. And when I got to the spot where I was like, I finally asked somebody how to get where I was going. I said, hey, do y'all know where I-26 is? They looked at me and said, I-26? They didn't even know what I-26 was. So I knew I was in trouble whenever they didn't know where I-26 was. So, we ended up making our way back home. But it was a matter of I wasn't willing to ask for directions. I wasn't willing to ask for help. I wasn't willing to be truthful about my circumstances. It's like if you want to stay lost, don't ask for directions. Guaranteed you'll stay lost. Unless you're just lucky enough to circle back and you'll be like, I knew where I was the whole time. Knew where I was at. But the circumstances matter to him. They matter in your life too. Because if you don't believe somebody cares about your circumstances, if you don't care about your circumstances, why should he? But if we go back just a little bit earlier in Matthew 9, 18, 26, and this is right before the two blind men ask him to heal him, and he asks them if they believe he can do this. There's another story, and one of the more famous stories out of the Bible is the story of the woman with the issue of blood. And this one is just incredible. The parody it shows, because he asked the blind man, do you believe that I can do this? But if you go back just 6 verses, it says, in verse 20, it says, and suddenly a woman who had a flow of blood for 12 years came from behind and touched the hem of his garment. For she said to herself, if only I may touch his garment, I shall be made well. But Jesus turned around, and when he saw her, he said, be of good cheer, daughter, your faith has made you well. And the woman was made well from that hour. Now, this is a completely different set of circumstances. Y'all notice? She doesn't ask Jesus for anything. She doesn't call his name out. She doesn't do anything. He's in a crowd of people. She's in a condition that made her socially unacceptable. Anybody felt socially unacceptable? She was socially unacceptable. By the religious leaders, by the regular folk, she was considered unclean. She was not supposed to be in the midst of people. And guess what? Here was Jesus, the man she needed to get to. He was in the middle of a crowd of people. There was people all around him, and it says that she pushed through and touched the hem of his garment. She tried to be sneaky. She was that person that, I'm not important enough. God, he doesn't need to know all. He just need, I just need to touch him. I just need to get a little bit close enough so that I can get the healing, because he's more than enough to heal me. How many of us have felt that way? You feel like, I'm in a bad circumstance, but I know that my God is more than enough. My God, it was, I don't want to start singing, I might make y'all run. But it was Jeremiah Yokin. I think he had that song before. Y'all probably know what I'm talking about. He said, my God is more than enough. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Don't tell everybody I was sung a little bit. But he says, he is more than enough. He supplies all my needs. He is my El Shaddai, right? Come on, somebody else help me out. You know the song, I think. He looks out for me. Well, and this lady, she knew who she needed to get to. She knew what she needed from Jesus. She knew that if she could just touch his garment, that she would be made whole. And Jesus' response to her is so drastically different from that of the blind men. Because the blind men, he asked him, hey, do you believe that I can do this? Do you believe that I'm able to do it? But not in her case. He doesn't say anything to her, but he turns around and says, be of good cheer, daughter. Your faith has made you well. Because there was no sense in him asking her a question, because she had already demonstrated through her faith that she believed he was her healing. He believed that she believed that he could touch her and that he would heal her. So there was no need for any questions on his part. She had made the effort. She had broken all the religious barriers. She had broken the religious rules to get to the one that held her healing. How many times do we fall from that? How many times do we not hold on to that knowing that God is there for us? How many times are we looking to the wrong places? How many times do we look at the distractions that are around Jesus? How many times do we see, I know I need this with Jesus, but there's so many other things that are keeping me from getting there. I've got to work. I've got a family. I've got all these other things. I've got my own problems. I've got these things, I think Brother Petty said this morning, things I don't want to let go of. How many times do we hold on to things? I'm going to give Jesus every area of my life except for this little region right here. I'm not going to let him in right there. Well, guess what? That's probably where Jesus is going to show up and say, hey, would you be made well? Do you want to be made well? Are you willing to get up and do what I tell you to do? Are you willing to take up your bed and walk? That crippled bed that you've been sitting on, that you've been holding on to, that thing that you use as a crutch, that thing that you use as an excuse to not be healed. How many times do we use our circumstances as that crutch? We use where we're at to keep ourselves from being blessed by God the way He wants to bless us. But he didn't do this with the woman with the issue of blood. She demonstrated her faith. She showed where she was at. She showed where her faith was in the fact that she touched Him. I remember that old song, Brother Sister Finley. Remember they used to sing it, if I could but touch the hem of His garment. I used to laugh at them when they sang that song, but it was a long time ago. I don't know if any of y'all remember them, but they used to sing that song, and it tripped me out. I was a teenager. I was probably a little less respectful than I should have been. But they used to sing that song, and I didn't get it at the time, but I understand it now. But He told her, be of good cheer, daughter, your faith has made you well. Again, demonstrating that your faith has something to do with your relationship with Him. Jesus' relationship with you is not going to be completely one-sided. We said, there's always one side is more faithful in a relationship between us and Jesus. Who's the more faithful? It ain't me. It's Him. He's the more faithful of us. But He also tells us in Matthew, just even a couple chapters earlier, back in probably the most famous sermon ever given. Anybody know what the most famous sermon ever given was? It ain't this one. Just so you know, it's not this one. I appreciate the boost of confidence, but it wasn't this one. Jesus gave a sermon called, it's got its own title, it's got its own name. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. And in the Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew chapter 7, verse 7, He says this. He says, ask and it will be given you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be open to you. The Bible just tells us time and time again what God is willing to do for us, and all you have to do is ask. And so how many times do we just, I'm not asking. I'm not going to ask. I won't ask for it. Well, you're not going to get it. Jesus says, ask and it will be given to you. He's not trying to hold something back from you, just like He asked the blind men. Do you believe that I am able to do this? They said, yes. He says, oh, according to your faith. There you go. Now, I've heard a lot of preachers use these things to try to turn this to mean anything and everything. Anybody else ever heard that? A lot of them called prosperity preachers. Oh, you do all these things and God's going to bless you. Send me a dime. He's going to send you $1. Don't get caught up in that. Most likely they're not who they say they are. But Jesus truly tells us to ask and it will be given to you. Seek for it and you'll find it. And you will find that He has more for you. But if you go back over, I know I'm jumping all over. But back in John again, John chapter 14. See if I'm in the right spot here. Yeah. Verse 14, in chapter 14, verses 12 through 14. See, that was why I was getting stuck on 14. Jesus is telling His disciples, He's telling these people that are listening to Him, He says, most surely I say to you, he who believes in me, the works that I do, he will do also. And greater works than these he will do, because I go to my Father. And whatever you ask in my name, that I will do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If you ask anything in my name, I will do it. He wants us to ask Him. Yeah. How many times, and most of us have kids in here, how many times have your kids, your kids want something, they're after you about something, but you're going to make them ask. Lori does it to Tristan all the time. She'll get him. Tristan will start talking to her. She'll be like, what do you want, son? And he'll be like, oh, no, nothing. What do you want, son? Eventually, it'll be something. Now, however big or small, doesn't matter. He still wants to be asked. And that's why He's just asked. Anything in my name, and I will do it. And when we put that into the context, we put where He says, ask and it shall be given to you. Just do anything you ask in my name will be done. But there's a reason for it. And notice the reason for it is, He says that He will ask anything He will do anything that we ask in His name, not because we're so great, we're so wonderful. Isn't that nice? Yeah, you're so good, I'm going to do it for you just because I love you so much and because you're going to be so blessed. Is that why He says He'll do it? No. Look at what He says. He says He will do it that the Father may be glorified in the Son. Jesus keeps His word. Jesus keeps His promises because it glorifies the Father through Him. So see, when we get these blessings poured out on us, when we get these healings and all these touches that Jesus does for us, it's not for our own good. It's to glorify His Father. And that's where the core of everything comes. In our life, isn't it supposed to be, when we say we're Christians, well, I'm a Christian now, isn't it more about I'm supposed to be reflecting God to the world? I'm supposed to be showing Jesus' love to my neighbors and to my family and to my friends, showing the whole world how good Jesus is. That's what being a Christian is all about. That's what we're supposed to do. That's where it comes in, that when we ask something, should we ask something selfish to glorify the Father? How many times do we do it? How many times do we ask Jesus something? We ask the Lord, we'll pray for something. Lord, if you'll just get me out of this mess I've caused, I'll be good. I promise I won't do it again. But He says to put it, He's going to do it for the glorifying of His Father. And He wants us to believe these things, but it also takes us into another section of Scripture, and I promise this is the last one I'm flipping to. It's in James chapter 4. And see, because some of you may actually have the argument, I prayed about something for a long time, and I never saw the answer for it. I prayed for things to change, and I had dreams that fell apart watching them while I was praying. Anybody had that happen? You just knew you were praying in faith. You knew you were praying for something that you felt that was what you needed to pray for. Nobody's ever prayed for that? Okay, I'm about to say. And then when it doesn't happen, what happens when your prayer seems to have failed? When your prayer seemed to come on deaf ears, like God wasn't listening to you. It was like it hit the ceiling and came right back down on top of your head. How do you square that with the Bible when He says, ask and it'll be given to you? Ask anything in my name and I'll do it. But then I prayed. I did what you told me to do, God. I called on you. I asked it in your name, and it didn't happen. Things have fallen apart now. I lost all the wealth that I had acquired. I lost my business assets. I lost my home. I lost my family. I lost all these things, and I was praying for you to do something about it the whole time. But that's where James actually tells us. He gives us a few words in verses 1 through 3 that make a little sense out of it, actually. Because in James chapter 4, verse 1, it says, "Where do wars and fights come from among you? Do they not come from your desires for pleasure that war in your members? You lust and do not have. You murder and covet and cannot obtain. You fight and war, yet you do not have because you do not ask." And I think this is Jackie Barnes' life verse, because I've heard him say this verse I don't know how many times. But in verse 3, he says, "You ask and do not receive because you ask amiss, that you may spend it on your pleasures." Now, if you just look at the way it reads, you would think that has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. But if you go back to the very first verse of this chapter, where it says, "Where do wars and fights come from among you?" There's a lot of debate about if that is accurately translated. Because there's a lot of them out there that are saying that verse should actually be translated, instead of among you, within you. Okay, so change that. So now we're not talking about me and you and all of us are fighting. Now I'm talking about I'm fighting with me. I'm fighting within myself. And put that in the context of, where do the wars and fights come from within yourself? Where do they have? Do they come from your own desires, battling and warring against what God desires for you? Who can relate to that? Who knows what it's like to have that internal battle, that internal struggle, where you want to do right by God, you want to live for God, but your body and your whole other life wants to tell you to live another way? Well, that's what he's telling us here. He's like, you do all these things. He says, you have war in your members. You lust and do not have. You murder and covet and cannot obtain. You fight and war. And then he says, you do not have because you do not ask. But then he says, but when you do ask and receive, it's because you ask amiss. You ask for the wrong reasons. How many times do we pray things for the wrong reasons? How many times do we go to God in prayer out of desperation? Anybody? How many times? We don't have a true desire desire for what God wants in the situation, we go to Him out of desperation. We go to Him as a last-ditch effort. How many times, and I mean, I'm guilty here. I'm not putting myself up here on this podium. I might be standing taller right now, but that don't mean I'm right. We go to God as a last-ditch effort. We go to everything else. We will go to the doctors. We will go to the lawyers. We will go to anybody else. We will go to our friends down the street and ask advice before we call on God. We will ask a stranger passing us on the highway before we ask God what He wants us to do. But He tells us that we ask amiss because that's not the end of that verse. He says, you ask amiss that you may spend it on your own pleasures. See, that's the problem with a lot of us as Christians. A lot of us as Christians, and I say us because this includes me. This includes probably all of us. How many times do we get in our own way when it comes to our walk with Jesus? We watch and we see what's going on and we want to have a move. We want God to do something for us, but we want to do what we want to do as well. We're not willing to do as He said. We're not willing to deny ourselves, take up our cross and follow Him. We're like, I'm going to have to get to that later. I got something else I got to do first. I got something else that I want to accomplish before I can go full board, on board with God. I can't go all the way with Him just yet because I got other stuff I've got to do. Well, He tells us there, that's what we define as you're asking amiss. We're asking for things from God, just like, when He talks about the man at the pool. Do you want to be made whole? If I had other things that I want to deal with first, I'm not ready to be made whole yet. And He tells them in there that they have to have that determination to be what God wants. We have to be like the woman with the issue of blood. She was determined that nothing was going to stop her from touching Him in His garment. Look at what she had to do to get to Him. She had to push through a crowd of people and swipe at His garment. She had to go against all the religious sayings of the day, all the religious laws. She had to go against all that to get her healing. How many of us are willing to do that? How many of us are willing to stand up against those laws of today to say, you know what? I'm going to touch the hem of His garment. I don't care what necessarily the church speak is. I don't necessarily care about what everybody tells me I ought to do. I've got to have an encounter with Jesus. I have to touch Jesus because He's the only one that can heal me. He's the only one that the power from Him will make me whole. Amen. That's where your faith needs to be focused. That's where your faith needs to be. Because when we are worn out, anybody feel worn out sometimes? Yeah, as hot as it's been out here, man, whoop, it wears you out quick. I get it in like 15 minutes and I'm like, man, I need to go sit down and have a drink. Let me go back inside. But see, we get in ourselves, some of us, who in here is tough? Who's tough in here? Mark's tough, yeah. Mark's tough. I used to, I think I'm tough at times. Yeah, I can do these things. As me and Jason talked, I talked about it a little bit last week, how we found out we weren't as young as we used to be last weekend. We used to think we were tough and could work all day in the heat. Last week we were about to die. But when we think we're tough and we think we don't need any help, that's when we find ourselves in a bad situation. That's when, if you go on down in James chapter 4, verse 6, it says, but He gives more grace. Therefore, He says, God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. Learn to be humble. Learn to know when you need to take that grace. Realize that God's looking out for you. And then, to kind of here at the end here, verse 7 is an important part of this whole thing for us to remember. Thinking of the woman with blood, thinking of the man at the pool of Bethesda, thinking of the blind men. Now put yourself in their circumstance. And verse 7 says this, therefore submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Verse 8, draw near to God, and He will draw near to you. Okay, anybody in our Sunday school class may remember we actually had this in a lesson a few months back. But in the verse 8 where it says, draw near to God and He will draw near to you. I have a tendency to word chase when I'm doing Bible Sunday school. I'll get on the subject and I'll be looking at things and I'll start taking the words back to their roots and what do they mean, where do they go and all this. And when I was teaching this in Sunday school, I got stuck on that word draw. Anybody else ever just get called on a weird word like that? Everyday word, draw near to God. But I chased it down to the root, and for the root word that it goes back into the Greek, I can't pronounce it, so I'm not going to try to. But it actually means to literally drag yourself. So change that. To drag yourself to God. And He will drag Himself to you. Now go back and look at the 3 examples that we had. We had blind men who had to make their way to Jesus and who had to stand on their faith that He would make them be able to see. The man in the pool of Bethesda, he had to work his faith. He had to drag, literally, he had to drag himself to get up and take his bed and walk. And the lady with the issue of blood, she dragged herself through a crowd of people that would have ran her out of town if they knew what she was doing, because they had to drag themselves to God, so He would drag Himself to them. Picture that as your life. You're dragging yourself to God. Hold on to that, because we're going to get worn out. We're going to get tired, and the older we get, the slower we're going to move. Makes me feel bad. But there's going to come a time when we are completely helpless. We may not know what it's like to be that man at the pool. We may not have experienced that yet. We may not have been to that depth to know what it is like, to where we have to have somebody completely bail us out. I actually have. Tristan will laugh about this one, because I wasn't real happy with him during this. When my knee went out about 6 years ago, I was outside, the boys were in the house. They were having themselves a good old time. I was working on a lawnmower. Well, I went to stand up. He knows where I'm going already with this. I went to stand up and, my knee popped. Anybody ever have that? Your knee just pops at random times? It feels weird, right? Well, I've dealt with that since I was a teenager. But this pop was different. Because when this pop happened, my knee bent and it didn't straighten out until they cut it open to do surgery on it. My knee completely collapsed on itself. I'm in the yard hollering and screaming, and my wonderful boys come out rushing to pick Dad up. Dad, are you okay? Well, can we help you? No. They're in the house just having themselves a good old time, to which I have to drag myself. So I know what it means to actually have to drag yourself now. When I say you have to drag yourself, I had to drag myself up the steps. I go in the back door like the Terminator and fall down. To what Tristan is looking at me like, what's wrong with you? So he had to drag me to a car, to drag me to a doctor, so that the doctor could then come in and laugh at me. But I was completely dependent on his ability to get me up, carry me, and get me to where I needed to go. That was something I had never experienced in my entire life. But I experienced it that day. And some of you know what it means to do that. Some of you know that experience as well. It may not be exactly the same, but you know what it's like when you have to depend on somebody else to care for you and to get you where you need to go. Someone else to take your burden as their own. Anybody ever had somebody take your burden as their own? Yeah, it's good to know that you have people to do that. But it's even better to know that there's a God that's willing to take that burden from you and help you to get up and walk where you were a cripple laying on the side of the road. Where you may have had to have someone drag you, He will give you the strength to get up on your own and do it in your own power, do it in your own strength, and to carry on after Him because He loves you and because He has a plan for you. And think, in those days, if he had the same condition I did, there wasn't a doctor to come in and just cut his leg open and fix everything up. No, he would probably remain a cripple for the rest of his life. But that's where our walk will take us. And sometimes, let's be honest about it, sometimes our Christian walk, most of us are good at putting on the church face in here. Who comes into church sometimes, you don't feel like being here? You would rather be somewhere else. You'd rather be sitting at home watching TV, watching good old John Hagee or somebody like that. It'd be so much easier just to stay home. And you come into church, everybody's like, how you doing? I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm blessed and highly favored, brother. There's times when we need to drop that church face and get on our knees and be willing to call out on God and say, you know what? I need prayer. I need help. I need a touch from the Master. I need Jesus to walk my way. I need Jesus to come by so I can touch the hem of His garment so that I can go on past this. I need to leave this behind me. I need to leave this pool behind me. How do you think that the crippled man, I don't know, the Bible doesn't say, but do you think he ever, in his rest of his life, do you think he ever went back to the pool of Bethesda? Why would he? Why would he go back to where he expected to get healing and there was none to be found until a man came by and said, take up your bed and walk. Get away from here. That's what we need to do. We need to remember our healing is not in some pool. Our healing is not in some preacher. Our healing is not in some church. Our healing comes from God. It comes from Jesus, the one who is the author and finisher of our faith. That is where our healing comes from. That is where our help comes from. Yeah. Anybody say amen on that? Yes, please, come on. He is the reason we can get up and say, I trust in God. I don't trust in anything that man's going to help me do. Because the Bible does tell us this. It says, let God be true and every man be a liar. They don't go home and tell everybody I called everybody liars. The Bible did it. It wasn't me. So that included me. But as we're going to close out here, I want everybody to please stand up. Bow your heads and close your eyes. I got it right. I have said bow your eyes and close your heads. And just take a minute. Where are you at? What is your situation? Are you the blind man? Are you the crippled man? You the one with the issue of blood? What is your circumstance? What is it that you have to fight through right now to get to God? What is it that you need to do right now? And is he telling you your faith has made you well? Is he telling you, is he commending your faith? Or is he questioning you? Is he asking you a question? Is he asking you, do you believe that I can do this? And is he asking, would you actually be made well? Would you take the healing? Would you do what you want me to do? See, there are times when Jesus has told them, he's like, y'all ask me something, but you're not really ready for it. You ask for something that you're not able to take. You're asking for something that you don't understand what you're asking for. The old saying, be careful what you ask for, because you just might get it. I always hear people, I want to be patient. Don't pray for patience. You know how you get patience. You go through a lot of hardship to get patience. But leave it out of here. In all your circumstances, no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, no matter what you're facing. Remember verse 7. Draw nigh to God, and God will draw nigh to you. Drag yourself to God. Drag you with every fiber of your being. I always picture the guys out in the movies. You know, war guys. They've been beat down. They've been in a war. They've been shooting everybody. It's amazing. They'll kill everybody. But then they're just so tired and so weak, they're just dragging themselves with their hands and they're barely moving, just trying to get to safety. Picture that when you think about dragging yourself to God. Draw near to God, He will draw nigh to you. He will be more than enough for you. He will be more than enough to give you healing, more than enough to open your blinded eyes. He can heal any circumstance you face. And if you're dealing with something tonight and you want special prayer, these altars are always open. If you've lost a fellowship with God, I mean, I've been there before, trust me. Maybe a couple times this week. I'll be honest with y'all, there's times during the week I just be like, man, ain't nothing Christian looking about me. You see me, I'll be like, man, that guy, he goes to church? Draw nigh. Let Him pull you back in. Let Him do the thing. You need to get into fellowship with God. Come down to these altars. You need a touch from God. Come down to these altars. But better than that, He don't even have to have. Guess what? Do y'all see Him standing down here? Y'all see? No, because He is everywhere in here. We like to make a big show out of it sometimes, I'm not knocking the altars. But He's as much God at that back door as He is right here. There's no place in this sanctuary, there's no place that you are that He hasn't already been there waiting on you or waiting on you to get to the next one. He is everywhere you go. And He can touch any ailment you have. He can touch any problem you have. But He might be waiting to ask you, would you be made well? And do you believe I can do it? Because just like anybody else, He don't want to have to prove Himself to you. He already done that. He's already proved Himself repeatedly. Time and time again, God has proven Himself to us. And as we leave out of here tonight, I hope everybody got something out of this. We're going to go dismissal in prayer. But just take a minute and reflect and see what God has done for you and what He's doing with you. Because guess what? That wasn't the end of the road for any of them. The Bible doesn't tell us a whole lot about what happened to them. Other than the blind men was kind of funny. They actually, the first thing they did was exactly the opposite of what Jesus told them to do. I thought that was kind of funny too. Jesus told them, He said, make sure nobody knows about it. And what they do, they run out there and they start screaming and hollering, Jesus healed us! It's kind of funny how we work that way. Reverse psychology at work, I guess. But that wasn't the end of the road for them. That was the beginning. So that place where you're at right now, it's not the end. That place where you're sitting, that place where you're stuck, that place where you're having troubles, it's not the end. God's got a plan for you after this and maybe bigger and brighter. You might see more than you've ever seen. You'll do more than you've ever done. And you'll be cleaner than you've ever been. And as we leave out of here, I just want y'all to take that with you tonight. We'll just go to the Lord in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you again for the opportunity to be here. And thank you for the opportunity to be able to dig into your word and find these encouraging stories of how you have helped those that have gone before and how you're willing to help those that are coming after, but also you're willing to help us now. You're willing to look into our lives. You're willing to deliver us from any problems that we may have. You see all the faults and the failures we have, but you still love us and you're still willing to call us and help us to tell us that by according to our faith, these things will be done for us. And we just thank you for these opportunities. Pray that you go with us during this week, that we'll see you working in our lives and the lives of those around us, and that we'll be